Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT and CLT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions that are backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Jim Pierson with us. And Jim, I'd love if you can introduce yourself and where you're from.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Jim Pierson. I'm the Senior Regional Manager with University College Dublin. So, UCD is an Irish public institution based in Dublin, Ireland, but obviously I'm not Irish. I don't have the accent or anything, I'm sure, much to everyone's disappointment. But I live in the Chicago suburbs. I've been based regionally in the US with UCD for about 10 years now, and I work in recruitment and admissions. I work with North American families from the US and Canada and students that are looking for an international education. So, a lot of undergraduate, graduate, and study abroad students that are looking to go abroad and find something a little different. And most of my time is working with those students that are looking to do a full degree internationally and go abroad for their studies, which is a more rare option for US and Canadian students, but is still a great opportunity to do something a little different and still get your education. So that's what me and the team in North America do. We have 7 people that are based full time in the US that work with UCD.
Great. Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about basically what you do, right? Which is having US students go internationally for college. And we've covered a ton of stuff on this podcast, and surprisingly, this has not come up yet. And I'm really excited to go through this today. I think let's take it from the top, right? First off, why do people in the US want to study abroad? What are
Yeah,
kind of
and
the
it,
typical reasons that you see?
Yeah, it's absolutely a more niche option. Most students stay really close to home. There's tons of great opportunities for university studies in the US. So a student graduating high school is more likely to stay closer to home. And if they're looking for something a little further away, there's so many opportunities in the US that you can go to the other side of the country and still be far from home and still get that great education. But I think in the
Yeah,
10 years
the
I've been
US is
doing it,
also really big, which
yeah,
like it's like from LA to Boston is probably the same as from Lisbon to Moscow. It's just
yeah.
the US is a very large country.
Yeah, and if I'm talking to students from Boston, going to Dublin is about as far away as going to LA, honestly. So the time zone change is pretty close, the miles is pretty close. So there's really not a huge change in that, but the cultural change is the big difference. Although I guess you could argue there's a big cultural shift from Boston to LA as well. But
No
there
Air
is a,
One in
yeah,
Ireland, right?
exactly. Yeah, so big difference, Starbucks versus Dunkin', so that's a big change there. But yeah, going internationally is not as popular an option, but it grows in popularity each year as students find opportunities and want to do something a little bit different. And we'll get into it, but there's a lot of things that you can do abroad that you can't do when you stay in the States. So courses that are available abroad or that might be a better fit if you're going abroad, if you're looking for a very specific course. And then the opportunity to do a really focused education. I think one of the draws we get from students that are really academically focused is that if you're going to most countries abroad for a public institution, there's no general education requirements. So if you study physics, you never take another history class again. If you study English lit, you never take another math class again. And students really appreciate that focus and that directness and going straight into their courses. So we end up getting a lot of students that are very academically motivated, that are looking for something very specific and want to dive right into their subject. So there's that, and then just getting away from home and getting to experience something else and jumping into something that's a bit different is a huge draw.
I don't know if this is an offensive way to phrase this, but how many people are eat, pray, love people? Like they're just like, I've always dreamed of being in country X, and this is my chance to do that.
Yeah, it's one of the running jokes in Ireland is the amount of Americans that'll go over and say they're Irish and their ancestors move over in the 1850s or 60s or something, so their connection's honestly a little tenuous. So we do get a lot of students that they have some Irish connection. They grew up in Boston or Chicago or something, and they're used to celebrating St. Patrick's Day in the American fashion and want to reconnect with the homeland. And then there's a lot of students that have no connection to Ireland at all, no real background in it. They're just looking for something that's not the same as what everyone else is doing, and that's always a big draw as well.
Yeah, and I think also a nice thing about it is that it is in the EU, but it is 100% English speaking. So I feel like if you're looking for the ability to travel around the EU, but you don't necessarily want to go to school in France and deal with the fact that you don't know any French, could be a decent option for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And since Brexit, like I said, I've been here since 2015, and the world's changed a lot since 2015. And Brexit is one of those big things that really shook up how students consider their options, because the UK is a huge country and always a big draw for international ed. But that access to the EU, and there's the opportunity for travel and kind of the integrated nature of the EU, but on a practical level, like we offer exchange programs and research funding and scholarships for students that are available because of the EU that you can't get access to at a UK institution in a lot of ways. And that kind of big difference is another reason that students are looking more to Ireland. It's a small country. There's only 4.5 or 5 million people in Ireland, but it's growing in popularity because of that. And yeah, the English speaking option. And that's something that a lot of students and families have to consider when you're going abroad. There's tons of options, and you can study in English in an English speaking country, you can study in English in a non English speaking country, or if you have the language skills, study in another language. But that's the whole other layer of questions that students and families have to navigate their way through as they're looking to go abroad. Is you get the same college options as if you're staying in the States. You can go to a school in the country or in the city, you can go to a big school or a small school, but then you have this other layer of questions you got to work through and figure out where you fit in.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to my next question, which is what are the people that are a good fit for this? Certainly, I'm sure, if you are Italian and went back to Italy half a dozen times while you're growing up, you might feel like you're a better fit going to Italy for that reason. But I feel like there's more general reasons that are probably just like what type of student is going to succeed in this environment.
Yeah, and I really like the kind of soft skills or personality aspect of it. You do have to be an independent student. You have to be able to kind of take risks or be outside your comfort zone, and that feels like it should be a given. But it's every year talking to students that think they want to go abroad and then realize how far away from home it is, or that they're going to miss their cousin's wedding, they're going to miss homecoming, they're going to miss all these things they think they could do if they were going to school closer to home. Then, those students naturally figure out that it might not be a good fit. So if you're going abroad, it is far away. You are going to come home for winter break and summer break, and really that's about it for a few years. And for some students, that's what they want. They want that distance, but if you don't have that, it's a hard fit. And then I think academically, like I was saying, you do have to be very focused to go abroad. And the big distinction, like I said, you don't have general education requirements when you're going to international universities, but the flip side is that it's much harder to change your major. Because if you do a year in politics and realize you hate it, you've done 1 year of nothing but politics. So if you want to switch over to archaeology, you've done no overlapping coursework. So you start over from year one in a brand new subject. So there's not really typically the options for an undecided major or interdisciplinary studies like you'd see in the US. So you really have to know what you want from day one. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty tough adjustment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And anything like personality wise that you would like you mentioned kind of students that want to get away and that makes
Mhm.
sense, but anything personality wise that you think it makes people more suited to study abroad?
I think the kind of flip side to the academic focus is if your idea of university is from US movies like Animal House or something like that, then you're not going to find that same thing going abroad. There's no fraternities or sororities outside North America. You don't get like the big college game days. If you want a Big Ten or an SEC kind of experience, you're not going to find that no matter how big the school is outside the States. So if that's your idea of what college will be, it's going to be a different experience. There's still great social options and ways to get involved in sports and that, but it wouldn't be the same as going to a Big Ten school. Like I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and it's a different experience because of the way U.S. universities have their culture. So you got to be open to that other culture, that difference, and adjusting to that. And I think having that personality of being, I don't know, worldly minded and wanting to engage with people from other cultures, wanting to put yourself in a new environment and figure out how to thrive there. I think that's the students that naturally gravitate towards this option.
Yeah, would you say the culture is more like US graduate schools where like it's mostly about the work, like there's social stuff, but you're just there for the school part, whereas like a lot of American undergraduate universities, you're there for the social part and like the school is secondary, right?
It
Is
feels
that
like that
is
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that academic focus is you're going into a 3 or 4 year degree and you're taking nothing but linguistics courses. So you're with the same students for 3 or 4 years because you're all taking the same coursework. So it almost feels like a cohort. So in that way, you also get that kind of grad school feeling of being with the same group of people for multiple years in a row doing this program, which is can feel a little claustrophobic sometimes. And that's where it's finding other outlets, other ways to get engaged, because it can feel more focused than a US university. So you have to get outside and do something different. And that's where, like I said, we have sports. They're not doing sports in the US, but you can still join the rugby team or the Olympic handball team or something like that if you want to get to know other students and learn something new. That's where it's worth putting yourself out there and meeting students from other areas of the university. Otherwise, it will feel kind of siloed and narrowly focused.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So then let's talk, I guess, we're touching on it anyway, so I want to dig into it officially, right? What are the pros and cons of doing this? What are the advantages and disadvantages you think? And I'm sure it changes by person, right? But let's maybe start with what are the big advantages that you try to share with people that are interested in college abroad?
There's a ton of opportunity that you have going abroad, and it comes through in a few different ways. Like I said, there are some courses you can do internationally that you can't do at an undergraduate level in the States. In
Mhm.
Europe, it's very typical for medicine, veterinary medicine, law, physiotherapy, all these graduate professional courses to be undergrad courses. So UCD has a 6 year medicine course that you just start directly out of high school. We have a 5 year vet med course. We have a 4 year law degree, and you do that as your undergraduate major. So instead of doing pre-law, pre-med, or something like that, you go straight into the course, and it saves you time, it saves you money, it saves you the headache of going through multiple different programs to get to your end goal. So you just dive right into it. The downside for that is if you want to end up practicing in the US or in Canada, wherever you're coming from, if you want to come back home and practice, there's usually a few more hoops that you have to jump through, and it can be a bit tougher to get certified or to get licensed or whatever it is if you're doing a professional program. So you have to navigate that and figure out if it's the right fit for you. Like law is a perfect example because it's all based on state bar associations, and there's 51 different jurisdictions in the US, and each one has different rules for how to bring back a foreign law degree. And New York is very liberal with it, and other states are less liberal with it, so it can be easier or harder depending where you want to go back to practice. So that's one of those things where it's,
And
yeah,
it's like you have to learn the laws of the place that you're in. I
yeah, our
mean,
students do a lot of
something,
EU law, Irish law, which maybe won't help them when they come back to New York or California or something.
yeah, maybe New York, you could work at some office
Yeah.
that's dealing with EU regulations, but like that's, yeah, it's starting to get narrow.
Mhm. Yeah.
But there are plenty of other things also, like medicine, where probably the way that they teach about red blood cells is the same in both to an extent. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is a focused degree. The pro being that you get to go straight into it, the con being, like I said, there's less flexibility. Like, you got to know that you're going to be a doctor if you're going to commit to a 6 year med school program at 18 years old. And if
Well, and
you
like
want
you
to be a
said, there's
doctor
no
because,
overlapping coursework, so if you decide you
Mhm.
don't want to be a doctor, you've got to go back to square one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've seen enough students that think they want to be a doctor because their family wants them to be a doctor, and it's really not their own passion, and you don't get the runway to figure that out by doing a pre-med course first. So it is really something that needs a lot of focus and making sure students are committed to it. But then the other benefit too is you finish school faster. You can finish university faster. So med 6 years instead of a total of 8 in the U.S. Even our standard degrees, our art history degree is 3 years, our business degree is 3 years. So you can go through these courses a bit quicker because you're not doing all those gen ed courses. So you get to finish it a little bit faster. Something that always comes up is students wondering about getting jobs, of course, and connections, or they're not going to have the same kind of alumni network if they go abroad as if they stayed somewhere closer to home. And it's true. If you're from Chicago and you go to University of Illinois or Northwestern, like, you get a huge alumni network you get to tap into, which you don't have if you're going abroad. The flip side to that, though, is if you're applying
Well,
to
is it
a
that
job.
you don't have it in the United States, or is it that you don't have it at all?
We don't have it in the U.S. We do have an alumni chapter for UCD students in Chicago, but it's obviously much smaller than you get from a U.S. university. So if you're staying in Ireland, if you're staying wherever you're doing your studies, then you'll have a huge alumni chapter. You'll have huge connections to other alumni, but it won't be the same if you're coming back home because it's going to be a smaller population. But being a U of I grad myself, if you apply for a job in Chicago, 50 other people also are U of I grads. So you don't really stand out, or it takes a lot more to stand out. Whereas when you're applying for a job with an international university as the top line on your resume, you stand out immediately. And it kind of showcases both that great unique aspect to your application and also all those soft skills employers want, like flexibility and willingness to take risks and ability to work with people from different cultures. You're showing that off through your degree immediately. So that's another way to stand out. So those pros and cons exist, but I think they balance each other out in a lot of ways. Students and families have to be aware of these pros and cons in a different way than if they're looking at US universities.
Yeah, and I think that there's quite a lot of structural advantages to going abroad. And what I mean by that is that the US university situation has gotten so competitive, like it's insane how every colleges with acceptance rates in the 20s and 30s a decade ago are now in the single digits, and that's true all over the place. Like you mentioned, the
Mm-hmm.
University of Michigan earlier. It used to be that if you were a valedictorian in Michigan, you were going to go there. Now it's not even really true
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Something that I've heard basically that there are equivalently reputationally ranked schools abroad that are easier to get into than US schools.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We can have a whole separate discussion on ranking systems and what they mean and their own pros and cons. But if you put stock in rankings, if you want kind of reputation generally, you can get into an equivalently higher ranked university or one of the top 100, top 150 universities in the world. It's much easier to get into abroad because of the different application pathways and the way applications are reviewed internationally are so different, and the demand for places is very different. And I think that's another pro and con if we get into the admissions talk and what it takes to get in. I think the benefit in most cases going abroad is that admissions requirements are much more transparent. You can see on a lot of universities exactly the grades you need, exactly the test scores you need to get in. And most students, if you get over that, you get in. The downside is it's far less flexible because it's not holistic in any way in a lot of cases. So if you need a 3 on AP Calc to get into a course and you got a 2, you will not get in. And there is no extra essay, there's no extracurricular that you can do that will make a difference with that.
Hmm.
But the flip side is if you have all the requirements, you get in and you're good to go and you don't have to worry about it. And it's not this kind of tough situation that U.S. students are in going to U.S. universities where it's, I don't know, was I in enough clubs? Did I do enough extracurriculars? Is my essay good enough? That whole admissions setup is so completely different in Ireland and the UK as well, and a lot of other places that students are looking at.
Yeah. Well, and I think also it's certainly true if you're trying to go into that country, right? If you're trying to live in Ireland and you go to one of the top five universities in Ireland, and also that university is equivalent to University of Michigan in the US or something, I think that the Irish companies and the Irish people will recognize UCD a lot more than Michigan, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's another thing, like access to a foreign job market in Ireland and most other countries. If you get a degree from a university in that country, you get to stay and work for usually a limited amount of time, 1 or 2 years, depending on your degree in the country, without needing any additional visa. And typically, if you are a US citizen without any other citizenship, you can't just up and move to another country and start working. It's far more difficult. So you get this whole other job market you get access to, and then you have a degree from a university that jobs employers in those markets will understand and value and know. So I think that's a great benefit to students that are looking for that opportunity.
Yeah, great. And let's talk just about the different pieces of this, right? So let's say you're like, okay, spiritually, culturally, I want to go abroad. What are the implications as far as the key pieces of the college admissions process? What are the financial implications? How is it going to change your student life? How does it change? You already mentioned that you need to pick your degree pretty seriously ahead of time. What other kind of things are there that you have to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of layers to this. And when I talk to students and families, I usually say if you're looking to go abroad, you need to start your research a little bit earlier than if you're staying closer to home because you have to learn a different system and a different process. And I don't know, I feel like students are starting their college search process too early these days. I don't want to contribute to that. If you pick up thinking you're going to go abroad in December of senior year or April of senior year, you're going to be way behind the game and you're going to have to be playing catch up a lot. So at least a little bit earlier reach out to someone at a university and start getting those questions answered of what you need, what the differences are, because there are a lot of layers to this. The academics and the application part, you do need to know what you need to get in, and like I said, it is very strict. It's different in every country, but like at UCD, we don't, for most of our courses, we don't read essays, we don't look at extracurriculars, we don't read letters of rec. We don't consider them, they're not accepted, it's not a part of our application. We look at high school
Oh, wow.
GPA and any test scores that a student has, and that's it. So if you have the right combination, if you have a 3.5 unweighted and a 1200 SAT, and that's what you need to get in for the course you're applying to, you get in, and that's all it is. It's as simple as that. And then if you don't have that, you will not get in, and there's no flexibility there. So that's why it really is that kind of
What if
transparency
you
and
have twice as many people than you typically have in a given year? At that point, do you have to turn half of them away, or do you literally double the class size?
So at least UCD, we're rolling admissions, so we'll accept students until we might reach capacity for a given course, and then we close capacity after that. And we're full on this particular course. Like our architecture course is full. If you want to come to UCD still, apply to engineering or apply to city planning or something like that. So that rolling admissions gives us that flexibility to say, sure, you're in. And we do have a priority deadline. If students apply by December 1st, they get their equal consideration and make sure that they have the opportunity for the course they want to go into. But we're rolling most universities abroad. It's very typical to see a rolling admissions process because of that.
That's so interesting that you guys literally don't even look at extracurriculars or anything like that because that's become almost the focal point of US
Mm-hmm.
schools. And in part, it's because US high schools have had such grade inflation over
Yeah.
the past, call it 20 years, that like we need extra things to try and tell who's actually good. And I'm curious, number one, how does the grade inflation affect you guys, right? Because that's one of the two data points you're looking at, and it's like very important. But if it's getting easier and easier for US students to hit a 4.0, then what do you do? And the
Mm-hmm.
second thing is, does that mean that if I'm the kind of person that's just very academic and I don't want to be the president of the chess club and don't care, that I would be better served by going abroad?
Yeah, for that second point, absolutely. If you don't have this extensive resume, or I see students these days that start nonprofits or publish research or something, and I'm like, when I was a high schooler, I was not thinking about that, and I
Oh
never
yeah,
would
I
have got
mean, I
to
we've
go
had
into it.
high school students apply to our internship program with like they're published authors. I'm like, okay,
Yeah, cool.
I'm in my late 30s. I have never even touched this.
Yeah. The philosophy or kind of the idea behind it is that international universities are looking for your academic suitability to the course you want to study, and that's it. So
Mhm.
more universities will look at just your math and science grade if you're going into a STEM course, or just your humanities grades if you're going into arts and humanities course, because we don't care if you're good at math if you're studying English lit. You're never going to take a math class at our university. So we don't need AP Calc or whatever it is to get into it. So I think there's that part where it's that focus on your experience in the field you're going into is what the importance is. To the first part with grade inflation, it's like my Irish colleagues are generally like blown away at the decentralization and lack of standardization in US education. It's like a high school a mile away from another school could have a completely different grading scale. The grades that you get mean nothing compared to this other high school because it's all non-standardized and it's all random. So that's where you'll also find far fewer international universities that are test optional or test blind or anything like that. So it's much harder to find that because international education is typically very standardized. Irish students all take the same set of exams across the whole country. They get the same grades and the same score at the end of that, so everything is the same across the country, and it's not even the same within the same city in the US. So it is much harder to find something like a test optional university abroad. There are still options and there's a little bit of flexibility built in there, but it is tough because, yeah, the grade inflation is real and makes it a tough adjustment for us looking at students. I think a funny thing with that is that our students come over and they're used to getting straight A's because that's the standard. They're good students, and if they don't get an A, if they get an A minus, it's like the end of the world. And grade inflation is not at the same level abroad. So a
Mhm.
standard good grade at UCD is a C, and you get a C, and it's great. You did awesome. Or standard good grades in the UK can be a 65%. And if a
Mhm.
student in high school now, like one of those high achievers, got a 65%, they break down because they're not used to that kind of rating scale and how it works. So it's an adjustment for students when they come over. That it is operating in a completely different environment, and the scale is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also good to know. I'm curious then, what are the differences in the financial implications for going abroad? Like, I would imagine that, and maybe I'm just assuming things here, but I'd imagine that it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, I think the biggest myth that I have to confront with students and families is the first one, is this a real degree? And yes, it is a real degree. There are non reputable institutions abroad, just like there are in the States. But yeah, if you're going to a public school abroad, it's going to be a real degree that you'll use for something in the future. And then the big myth is it's going to be way too expensive for anyone to consider. And I think most of our degrees and most universities that I know of, we'd be competitive financially with out of state options, with private universities. We wouldn't necessarily be competitive with your local in state school, but maybe, depending on University of Michigan and University of Illinois, are expensive in-state options even now. So in some cases, we might be a bit more competitive. UCD's total cost of attendance for a full year at UCD, depending on the exchange rate, can be around 40 to 42,000 US dollars a year for tuition and room and board and books and travel and all that, which is not nothing, but still considerably less than a lot of out-of-state schools and a lot of private schools these days. So I think that's where most students that are looking at us are also looking at out-of-state options. So it's within their realm of possibility. I think the big difference is there that international schools typically wouldn't do need-based scholarships, so that's pretty rare. You'll see a lot of merit-based scholarships, and that's what we offer as well. And then your funding options will look different if you're looking at kind of grants and loans. Like UCD and a lot of schools accept U.S. federal loans, so you can fill out the FAFSA, send it to us, and you can use direct subsidized, unsubsidized Parent Plus loans with us now. But the federal government won't allow grants to travel abroad, so like the Pell Grant can't be used at international universities. So students that are relying on that wouldn't be able to use that to make up any of the difference.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good overview. You mentioned that the 42K. I'm curious, is it more common or less common than typical US universities for students to live in like campus housing versus like stuff immediately outside of campus housing? And then how's the pricing compare? Because like at US universities, the on-campus dorm housing is often more expensive than like a local apartment.
Yeah, I think there's big differences there in shocking and good and bad ways. Most students going abroad will be able to live in on-campus accommodation their first year. Like a lot of international schools like UCD, we prioritize these first-year undergraduates because moving to a new country, finding an apartment to live in, and all that at 18 years old is a big shock, and we try to avoid that. So you live on campus with us your first year. It's far less common to find that universities would offer 4 years or like your full degree. You can live on campus, and there's usually no requirements to live on. You can if you want to, but if you have an aunt that lives in Dublin, you can live with them too, and that's great as well. The biggest difference is that it's far more common and pretty typical. Like at UCD, all of our accommodation is single room apartment style. So there's no shared rooms, there's no bunk beds, there's none of that. So that's a great benefit is you don't have this shared room. There's no triples or quads or anything like that. The big flip side is that it's very atypical to find anything like a meal plan. So you have an apartment at UCD, you have a kitchen with your apartment, you share it with your roommates, and you cook your own meals. And if you don't want to cook your own meals, you go out to a cafe or a restaurant or something on campus and grab something. That kind of all you can eat buffet meal plan system that a lot of big US universities have doesn't exist abroad, which does bring the cost down because you're not paying for this big meal plan. You are paying for your own groceries and all that, but I think typically our accommodation is about in line with what you might pay somewhere around Dublin. It can be a little bit less, it can be a little bit more, it depends on what you're looking at off campus.
Yeah, great. And then just general differences in student life and the experience, right? It sounds like you try to keep at least give the international students at UCD community with each other as a start, and then kind of how do you integrate them into the rest of the students?
Yeah, and UCD is a big school. We have about 30,000 students, and about a third of those students are international. We have around 8,000 students from 150 countries outside Ireland, so it is a diverse place, and there tends to be, like, we have an international student orientation the first week of term before class starts. So you get that opportunity to get to know other international students and get that community. I think full degree students tend to integrate pretty well with the Irish students as well because we're 70% Irish. So you get to know the other Irish students in your class and in your dorm and wherever you're living pretty well. I think, like I said, the way to meet students and have a life outside of your academics is to join a club or society, and that's like our student orgs that you'd see at a U.S. university. Is joining anything from board game society where you play board games on Thursday nights to joining a sports team and learning something, whether it's a new sport to you or something you play at home. But I think the big difference with sports is that it's all club teams, it's all student organized and student led. So it isn't anything like the NCAA that we have in the US. It's all more additional experience on top of your academics. It's not your whole life.
Great. Yeah, and then anything else like differences between US and Irish schools that we haven't covered yet before I move on to the logistics part?
Yeah, I think the other big benefit of going abroad, whether it's Ireland or another country, is that student life experience you get is traveling and experiencing the rest of the world. Like I said, I went to school in Illinois, and my weekend trips were to Peoria and Indianapolis. And the students I work with going to UCD, their weekend trips are to Barcelona and Paris and London. So it's a pretty different experience. And your
Hmm.
weekends, your break and stuff, you really get to experience the rest of the world. And I think that benefit as well is shows up in your academics. Like our architecture students do spring break field trips to Paris or Rome or Athens to study architecture in person. So all these things that you would want to do and see and experience in person, you can do that because it's right there. If you're studying history or archaeology, Europe's an incredible place to be because you get all that real life history and archaeology right in front of your eyes instead of through a textbook or a PowerPoint slide. So I think that's a benefit students love when they do get there, is they see that everything's so much closer because Europe is so much more accessible.
Yeah, that's really cool. But yeah, so then let's say you're sold. How do you do it? How do you get started? Kind of what processes do you need to go through that you wouldn't typically need to go through? Are you still taking the SAT and ACT, or are you doing something else? And what is the timeline when you should really be working on all this?
Yeah, it is in a lot of ways very similar to applying to U.S. universities. You're going to need a lot of the same things, transcripts and copies of test scores and things like that. You usually will apply fall of senior year. So UCD's application opens October 1st. A lot of universities I know will open applications in September, October, November, somewhere around there. Big differences compared to the US is there's no early action or early decision kind of application process. It really is usually rolling or one deadline. And like I said, it's easier because you don't have to worry about this extra application essay or anything else that you might be doing. It does vary a bit by country. UK has a very specific application platform called UCAS where you apply to up to 5 UK schools with the same application, and you do need to have an essay to apply to those universities, and it'll be a bit different at each institution, but I think you'll generally find that you'll apply sometime in fall, early winter of senior year. Usually results are released within a month or two after submitting applications. I think most universities, like UCD, we follow the May 1st deadline, so that traditional decision day, we let students have until May 1st to make a decision if they want to accept or decline. That's not the case everywhere, so you might get into a situation where a university expects you to make a decision in 2 or 4 weeks, which is maybe typical for that country or institution, but a bit faster timeline than a student might be used to here. So that changes a lot. And I think another benefit is a lot of international schools are on Common App. UCD is on a Common App. There's a few other, I think 3 other Irish universities that are, and a bunch of UK and other international schools are. So if you're looking abroad, that's a good first place to start. Most international schools are not on Common App, so it's not the only place you can apply, but it is a good start. And if you're already using Common App for US schools, it makes it easy to make the application pretty straightforward.
Great. Yeah, and then what's the timeline? How does it compare to the normal US admissions timeline?
Yeah, it is usually a bit faster, I think, in some ways. So we do return decisions pretty quickly. UCD aims for 4 to 6 week turnaround. I think that's different in every country. But it can be faster because we're not doing these kind of admissions committees. We don't have the essays to read, so it is just based on your academics. So it can be a pretty quick turnaround. It varies a bit by institution. I think something that's always worth bringing up when you talk about timeline is that it is very similar when you're looking at Europe or even if you're going closer, like Canada. I know a bunch of colleagues that work for Australian and New Zealand institutions, and because they're flipped calendar, flipped seasons, everything's very different there. So if you're looking to go to Australia or New Zealand, something a bit further away than even Ireland, then you should definitely reach out to the institutions to see what their academic timeline looks like because their summer is our winter, so their first term usually starts in February or March. So if you're graduating high school in May or June, you might take a 6 month kind of gap year, gap semester before you start your term. So that is another complication that is one of those things that's, yeah, research that a little bit early, figure that out if that's a good fit for you and know what you're getting yourself into. The other thing that I bring up for Irish universities in particular that always throws American families for a loop is that Irish students that apply to Irish universities don't find out what university they get into until mid August, about 3 weeks before term starts. So
Oh my
they,
God.
yeah, it is completely mind blowing to us from our perspective, where students want to know what school they're going to 10 months before term
Do you
starts.
know you're accepted at all?
Nope, you have no indication really. Like Irish students take their exams called the Leaving Cert exams in May, end of May, so right around now, early June, and then those grades get posted in August, and then depending on the grades that you got and the courses you applied to at the different universities, you get into your first or second preference or third preference, or it goes down the line depending on what grades you got. So it's all based on those grades that you got in the exams at the beginning of summer. So yeah, students have no idea where they're going to school until about 3 weeks before the first day of class, and then it's like a mad rush to move and get housing and get registered for classes. So I tell our students everything happens so much later when you're going to school in Ireland than it would if you're going to school in the US. People that going to school here, they might register for their classes in June or July or something like that. And our students register for class like August 30th, 31st, September 1st, 10 days before term starts. So it's a very different kind of timeline with that because everything is delayed because the Irish students are a very different schedule than we are.
Yeah, I could see that being really stressful if your first choice is to go to an Irish school, but I think you have to commit to an American undergrad way before August.
Yeah, so it's far rarer for an Irish student to look to the US or something for a degree, but that's why we have a different application timeline for our US students going to Ireland. They'll get their decision in as early as November, December of their senior year, and then they can commit and accept their offer by May 1st, and then they have that summer to prepare and get ready to transition over to Ireland. So it's a very different timeline
Okay, that
for
makes more sense. I was just thinking that it's like you had to basically not commit to a US school until 3 weeks before any school starts. Yeah.
no, that's just the Irish students and the EU students that are dealing with that kind of delayed timeline. But the non-EU students, the Americans, they're operating on the same timeline as they would for most US schools, and they'll know by May 1st usually if they're going to get in. I think the flip side is that we can accept applications much later than US schools. Like our applications are still open. They'll be open until August, really. If a student very last minute changes their mind or decides they really did want to go to Ireland and didn't commit to it until now, they could apply for a course in June or July. Some of the more popular courses might be full by then, but there would still be options for them if they wanted to apply late because we do have that extra flexibility.
Very cool. Are there any kind of overarching trends or changes that have been going on in this sort of whole process as we're getting into sort of the middle of 2025 here?
There's huge changes, even kind of long term over the 10 years that I've been in the field. So 10 years ago, we had a fraction of the students and a fraction of the interest in going abroad. I think it's just not a norm in the States for students to look outside the country, like I said. But every year we're out on the road and we go to high schools, we go to fairs, we meet students where they are, then it grows in popularity. And then as a student sees one of their friends go abroad, then they realize maybe that could be for them too, and it snowballs from there. And then there are far more international institutions that are based in the US than there ever have been. I've been here for 10 years, always based in Chicago. Most international schools fly people in for a few big fairs every semester, but now there are probably 50 international universities that have full time reps based in the US or Canada to work in North America. And when I started, there were 8 or 9 universities maybe. So it was pretty rare back then to have someone like me working in country like this. But students have so much more access and opportunity to ask questions of someone local to them, to meet someone in person, to chat with a rep at a fair from Italy or France or the UK or something like that. So I think that's a huge change, and we've seen this growth of interest because there's so many more international institutions that are recruiting here that weren't when I started. That's the
Yeah.
long term view. Short term, there's been huge changes. I think we saw a huge increase after COVID and as people started opening up more. In my personal theory on why we saw a huge boost in applications in 2021, 22 was that students just had cabin fever and they wanted to get as far away as possible as they could from home and from their parents because they had been stuck at home with them for so long. Get me out of here. I'm going anywhere else. But we did see a huge jump after COVID of students looking to go abroad, and that might have been part of it. And maybe they spent some time close to home just researching options, finding something they wouldn't have found otherwise. But there's been a big increase since then, and every year the number of students goes up and the increases grow, and then it's finding that interest and finding the students that are a good fit and that it makes sense for them to do this.
Yeah. Great. I think we've learned a lot today. I feel like there are a lot of really good things in this episode, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure we talked about.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about on this topic. It is, like I said, the full big picture scope of looking for a university and then adding in this whole other dimension of going international and going abroad. I think it's, like I said, really important to reach out to someone like me if you have these questions, and especially if you're, I don't know how to phrase it, maybe an edge case or maybe atypical applicant, then it's really important to reach out. If you're a homeschool student, if you have citizenship with another country and you want to explore going there, if you've done college experience, if you're in community college and applying, if you're looking to transfer, all those cases, it's really worth reaching out because it'll be very individualized. And we have a lot of ways to welcome students from all different backgrounds, but it's going to be a very different process if you have a kind of different educational background than the typical student you might see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good advice. Thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Jim Pierson from University College Dublin. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off.